At 88 years old, Dyan Cannon is still defying every rule Hollywood tried to write for her. This isn't just the story of a woman who dazzled on screen. It's the story of a survivor who turned scandal into survival and pain into performance. Few know that in 2025, Cannon allegedly caused a stir in Washington, D.C., when Secret Service officers questioned her after noticing a birth year discrepancy on her passport. She had listed 1950 instead of her actual 1937. For most, such a detail might have been an embarrassment. For Dyan, it became another headline in a lifetime of breaking molds. Vanity, she later joked, was her middle name. But that was only one layer of the drama. Earlier the same year, at a glamorous Hollywood beauty gala, she laughed openly about having multiple special friends in her life, a confession that sent tabloids into overdrive. How could an octogenarian still live with such boldness, such unapologetic freedom? To understand why these late-life revelations shocked the world, you have to look back. Behind the laughter and the sparkle lies a story of bruising childhood bullying, of Hollywood casting couches she refused, of a stormy marriage with Cary Grant that left scars deeper than any camera could capture. And yet, she emerged not as a victim, but as a force. From daring Oscar-nominated performances to her own groundbreaking films, Cannon proved that she would never play by anyone else's script. This is not a simple Hollywood fairy tale. This is the untold dossier of Dyan Cannon, the secrets she carried, the scandals she endured, and the astonishing legacy she continues to write at 88. Dyan Cannon was not born under the spotlight of Hollywood, but in the overcast skies of Tacoma, Washington, on January 4, 1937. Her birth name was Samil Dyan Friesen, and even her beginnings were layered in contrasts. Her mother, Claire Portnoy, was a Jewish immigrant from Ukraine who had escaped the brutal violence of the Russian Revolution. Her father, Ben Friesen, a Mennonite from Canada, sold life insurance to keep food on the table. Money was scarce, but resilience was plentiful. The trauma of her mother's past cast a long shadow over the household. Stories of murdered relatives and flight from persecution weren't bedtime tales. They were grim truths passed down like heirlooms. Dyan grew up with the awareness that survival itself could be a victory. That awareness would one day steel her against Hollywood's cruelties. But in Tacoma, survival was not abstract. At school, Cannon endured relentless bullying. Her darker features marked her as different in a community that idolized blonde hair and pale skin. Cruel words, mocking laughter, and even vandalized belongings carried an unmistakable message: she did not belong. To make matters worse, she developed a stutter that turned every classroom presentation into an ordeal. Words caught in her throat like stones, and classmates laughed when she froze. Yet at home, she transformed those wounds into fuel. Her mother stitched costumes for her, and the little girl stood on neighborhood stages, defying the voices that told her she was less. By the time she was 5, she was already performing in local plays. At 13, she entered the Miss West Seattle Beauty Contest, and against all odds, won. The rhinestone crown might have been cheap, but to Cannon it was priceless, proof that she could command an audience. Even then, the whispers never stopped. Some peers sneered that she looked too ethnic. Anonymous hands defaced her contest sash with hate symbols. But instead of breaking, she sharpened her determination. With the prize money and a few modeling gigs, she paid for voice lessons, dance training, and hours of practice in front of the mirror. Each exercise was a declaration. She would not be silenced. By high school, she had become the star of the drama club, embodying Emily Webb in Our Town with a presence that shocked teachers who remembered the timid, stuttering child.
She won acting awards 3 years in a row. But more importantly, she learned discipline. The insults carved scars, but they also carved resolve. For Cannon, adolescence was not a soft prelude. It was a battleground of identity, faith, and persistence. Every step she took out of Tacoma carried the weight of ancestral trauma and personal defiance. And when she finally set her sights on Hollywood, she carried not just ambition, but armor.
In 1957, with just $100 in her pocket and more determination than security, Dyan Cannon boarded a bus to Los Angeles. The girl from Tacoma who had once been mocked for her stutter was now standing in the city of dreams, though at first those dreams felt more like nightmares. She slept on her cousin's couch, ate when she could afford it, and auditioned for anything that promised a paycheck. Hollywood greeted her the way it greeted many outsiders, with rejection. Producers told her she didn't have the right look. Casting agents said her dark curls and olive skin made her too foreign to play the all-American ingenue. The blonde standard of the 1950s was unrelenting, and Cannon didn't fit the mold. A producer even suggested she bleach her hair and change her last name. She compromised on the name, shortening herself to Dyan Cannon, but refused to erase her identity. To make ends meet, she modeled dresses at a department store for $75 a week. At night, she studied with Sanford Meisner, paying $10 for lessons she could barely afford. She shared a cramped apartment with 3 other struggling actresses, where dinner often meant splitting a single loaf of bread. The offers she did receive carried a darker undertone. Again and again, Cannon was pushed toward roles that required her to play either the exotic temptress or the disposable mistress. Some casting directors proposed private auditions in hotel rooms. She walked out, even when it meant walking away from her last dollar. Respect over quick checks, she would later say. That became her code of survival. Still, the grind wore on her. She briefly became engaged to a nightclub owner, a decision born less of love than of exhaustion. But she broke it off, realizing that marrying stability would mean burying her ambitions. Her first stage came not from film, but from smoky jazz clubs. At a small venue ironically called The Losers, she sang Ella Fitzgerald covers and her own compositions for $50 a night. Patrons often heckled, some offering cruel comments about her looks, others reducing her to an object. Yet, night after night, she sang anyway. By 1958, Cannon finally earned her first screen credit, though it was modest, a waitress with 2 lines in an episode of Have Gun Will Travel. A year later, she appeared in Bat Masterson and Wanted Dead or Alive. These roles were fleeting, but for Cannon they were proof. She was on film. She existed. Her big studio break came when Warner Brothers signed her in 1962, but instead of meaty roles, she was relegated to the background, smiling pretty, delivering one forgettable line while male stars commanded the narrative. She earned $300 a week, a fraction of her male peers. The dream was becoming a gilded cage. Disillusioned, she did something radical for a young actress in 1964. She left Hollywood and packed her bags and went to New York to study acting more seriously. Under Meisner's grueling 5-hour sessions, she cried, broke, and rebuilt herself as an artist. That same year, she turned down a $10,000 role in a risque film that might have typecast her forever. Instead, she waited tables and joined the national tour of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, playing Rosemary to rave reviews. It was a gamble, but it would pay off, because when she returned to Hollywood, she was no longer the insecure girl from Tacoma. She was a woman ready to redefine what it meant to be seen. When Dyan Cannon returned to Hollywood in the mid-1960s, she was not the same hopeful girl who had once taken crumbs from casting tables. New York had toughened her. Meisner's classes had stripped away her insecurities, exposing raw nerves and teaching her to wield them on stage. She had walked through sabotage on Broadway tours,
endured restaurant shifts that tested her dignity, and turned down lucrative but degrading film roles. She came back with one mission: to be taken seriously as an actress. Her first triumph was not monumental, but it was a shift. Guest spots on television multiplied: Ripcord, Tombstone Territory, Hawaiian Eye. Though the paychecks were modest, they placed her face in living rooms across America. Cannon's persistence made her visible, even if only for minutes at a time. Then came 1969, the year that rewrote everything. Cannon was cast in Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, a daring comedy drama that explored infidelity, therapy, and the unraveling of traditional marriage. As Alice, she radiated vulnerability and wit, playing a woman negotiating between love, loyalty, and the magnetic pull of temptation. Audiences had never seen anything like it. The film exploded, grossing over $30 million, a staggering figure for the era. Critics raved, the Academy noticed, and Cannon found herself nominated for both a Golden Globe and an Academy Award. At 32, she had leapt from obscurity into the stratosphere. The irony was cruel. The role's themes mirrored her collapsing personal life. Just a year earlier, she had divorced Cary Grant, a man 3 decades her senior, whose charm masked darker dynamics. While her private life crumbled, her career soared. Hollywood thrives on contradictions, and Cannon embodied them perfectly. The early 1970s solidified her range. In The Love Machine, 1971, she played Judith Austin, a manipulative model who clawed her way through television's underbelly. In Such Good Friends, also 1971, she delivered one of her most harrowing performances, a wife discovering her husband's infidelities. Critics hailed her emotional bravery. Though the toll was heavy, she broke down on set more than once. That same year, she ventured overseas for The Burglars with Jean-Paul Belmondo and Omar Sharif, tumbling down rocky hillsides and performing her own stunts. A hospital stay followed, but so did international recognition. By the mid-1970s, Cannon was not just an actress, but an auteur in the making. In 1976, she wrote, directed, produced, edited, and scored a short film called Number One. Few women in Hollywood had dared such control, and fewer still had succeeded. The film stirred outrage for its frank exploration of childhood sexuality, yet critics also called it bold, raw, unforgettable. The Academy agreed. Number One earned an Oscar nomination. Cannon had made history as one of the first women to be recognized both in front of and behind the camera. The late 1970s brought her crown jewel, Heaven Can't Wait. Starring opposite Warren Beatty, she embodied Julia Farnsworth, a chillingly cold conspirator who poisons her husband for wealth. The film, made on a $6 million budget, raked in merely $100 million worldwide. It earned 9 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Cannon herself received another Academy Award nod, along with a Golden Globe win and a Saturn Award. While some critics dismissed her performance as melodramatic, audiences and peers applauded her fearless commitment. She had proven she could anchor blockbusters as both seductress and strategist. Amid this whirlwind, she kept expanding. In Revenge of the Pink Panther, 1978, she showed her comedic agility opposite Peter Sellers, managing to shine even as production was marred by his declining health and unpredictable behavior. Her timing and physicality balanced the film's chaos, earning her new fans in comedy as well as drama. By the decade's end, Cannon was more than a star. She was a phenomenon. She had stormed the box office, earned multiple Oscar nominations, and made a name for herself as a trailblazer behind the camera. She had done it without surrendering to Hollywood's easy temptations, refusing to let herself be typecast, refusing to accept that women belonged only in the background. And her rise wasn't confined to film alone. In 1984, she conquered television with Master of the Game, a miniseries adaptation of Sidney Sheldon's saga about power and betrayal in the diamond trade. Her role as Kate Blackwell, a ruthless matriarch who survives suicides, betrayals, and even murder plots, proved Cannon could dominate the small screen as easily as the silver one. Over 20 million viewers tuned in, cementing her status as a household name. Another Golden Globe nomination followed. In these years, Cannon was rewriting the Hollywood rulebook. She had gone from a child mocked for stuttering to an international star who controlled her own narratives. She had battled the studio system, weathered sexism, and emerged with awards in her hands and scars on her body. Every hit, every nomination, every dollar earned at the box office carried the same message. She was not disposable. She was indispensable. Yet for all the glitz and acclaim, shadows gathered behind the spotlight. Hollywood's love is fickle, and its applause can vanish overnight. For Dyan Cannon, the price of glory would soon reveal itself in ways as devastating as the applause had been intoxicating.
Behind the applause, Dyan Cannon's life was anything but charmed. Every accolade seemed shadowed by battles that tested her body, her mind, and her sense of self. The most haunting conflict began at home. When Cannon married Cary Grant in 1965, the world called it a fairy tale. He was 61, she was 28, a luminous ingenue stepping into the arms of one of Hollywood's most revered icons. But fairy tales in Hollywood are rarely innocent. Grant was already immersed in experimental LSD therapy under the supervision of a psychiatrist, convinced it unlocked hidden traumas. He insisted Dyan join him. For her, the experience was terrifying. Hallucinations, tunnels of darkness, and screams echoing in her head. She tried to endure, believing it would save their marriage. Instead, it fractured her sanity. By 1967, her mental health was spiraling, and she relied on pills and marijuana to cope. Their daughter Jennifer was born in 1966, but the marriage collapsed within 2 years. The divorce in 1968 left her with custody, but also with wounds invisible to the cameras. Years later, Cannon would write that the pain was like death by 1,000 cuts. The scars of that relationship bled into her career. On film sets, she fought against exploitation. She'd always refused roles that demanded nudity or caricatured her as a temptress. But the pressures never stopped. A co-star once cornered her on set, making advances she rebuffed with the threat of walking away entirely. On Ripcord, a helicopter stunt nearly killed her. During The Burglars, she was bruised and hospitalized after tumbling down a rocky hillside for a scene. Even success carried danger. The 1970s brought another threat, one that invaded her home. In 1976, a stalker broke into her Beverly Hills house, trashed her belongings, and left threatening notes. The ordeal forced her to move 3 times in a single year and spend tens of thousands of dollars on security. At night, she slept with a gun under her pillow, a grim ritual of survival. This was years before stalking laws existed in California, and Cannon's case helped fuel the conversation that privacy was not a luxury but a right. Then there were the rumors. Hollywood thrives on whispers, and Cannon was often the subject. During Heaven Can't Wait, tabloids alleged an affair with co-star Warren Beatty, citing late-night visits, lavish gifts, and even a diamond necklace. Cannon always denied it, insisting they were flirtatious colleagues, nothing more. But the press frenzy cost her lucrative endorsements worth nearly $200,000. She later quipped in her memoir that half the rumors in Hollywood are true, and the other half just haven't happened yet. Even the industry's highest honors became tainted. After Heaven Can't Wait, whispers spread that Oscar votes had been tampered with, possibly costing her the statue. There is no proof, only speculation, but the sting lingered. Cannon turned her frustration into art, producing and directing her own stories where she controlled the narrative. Still, the suspicion that Hollywood's gatekeepers had robbed her never fully faded. By the late 1980s, her conflicts turned inward. Haunted by the breakdown of her marriage, hounded by stalkers, exhausted by industry sexism, she slipped deeper into depression.
She checked into psychiatric facilities, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes on the insistence of loved ones. There she witnessed harsh treatments, electroshock therapy, over-medication, and neglect that would later inspire her film, The End of Innocence. She even went undercover into hospitals during the 1980s, documenting abuses firsthand. These images, restraints, shock paddles, silent cries haunted her, but she turned them into cinematic testimony. The film polarized critics, some praising her courage, others dismissing it as melodramatic. For Cannon, it was a purge, a way to translate private pain into public warning. Throughout these years, the tension between her strength and her fragility was stark. On one hand, she had made history with Oscar nominations and bold roles. On the other, she was a woman battling insomnia, insecurity, and memory she couldn't shake. Fame didn't shield her, it magnified her struggles. Even as she entered her later decades, the battles didn't stop. In the 1990s, she was forced back into court, this time against her second husband, Stanley Finberg. The divorce was bitter. Accusations of hidden money flew, and headlines once again made her private pain a public spectacle. Cannon's life was proof of Hollywood's paradox. The brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows it casts. She was applauded on stage, adored on screen, but stalked, slandered, and scarred behind closed doors. She didn't just battle for roles, she battled for respect, safety, and her sanity. And the war was not over, for if the 1970s and 80s showed her resilience, the 1990s would test her to the brink of collapse.
By the 1990s, the shine of Dyan Cannon's career masked a breaking point few could see. The woman who had battled studios, stalkers, and scandal was now waging war against herself. After her bitter split from Cary Grant in the late 1960s, she had rebuilt her career with grit. But decades of pressure, failed romances, and relentless rumors eventually exacted a price. Depression crept in like an uninvited guest, refusing to leave. By the mid-1990s, it had consumed her. In 1997, tragedy nearly struck in silence. Grieving her mother's death and feeling abandoned by the industry that once celebrated her, Cannon attempted to end her life. Pills, isolation, despair, her fight for survival came within inches of defeat. She was hospitalized for 3 days, then subjected to 12 rounds of electroconvulsive therapy. The treatment erased fragments of her memory, leaving her disoriented, sometimes mistaking strangers for Cary Grant. For an actress who built her life on memory and performance, this was a cruel irony. The fallout was brutal. In a 1999 interview with Oprah Winfrey, she spoke candidly about the fog left by treatment and the terrifying sense of losing her identity. Hollywood, meanwhile, was unkind. Opportunities for women over 50 had already dwindled. By 2020, only 12% of film roles would go to actresses past 60. But Cannon had faced that reality decades earlier. Scripts stopped arriving. The phone rarely rang. She was too young to be forgotten, too old to be forgiven by an industry obsessed with youth. Financial strain compounded the emotional turmoil. Her second marriage to real estate investor Stanley Finberg collapsed in 1991 amid courtroom battles over millions. She demanded $100,000 a month in support, claiming she had sacrificed her career for the marriage. He accused her of hiding assets. Court documents were sealed, but the headlines were merciless. To the public, the glamorous actress became another Hollywood cautionary tale. As if private despair and financial warfare weren't enough, her past traumas returned in shadows. She still remembered the stalker who had once broken into her home in the 1970s. She still carried the humiliation of being tabloid fodder, accused of affairs she never confirmed. Each echo from the past chipped away at her sense of peace.
The 1990s should have been years of quiet triumph, a time for a seasoned star to step into mentor roles, to claim the authority she had earned. Instead, it became an era of collapse. Depression, legal wars, career silence, and electroshock treatments reduced her to fragments of the woman who had once commanded Oscar stages. And yet, even in the ashes of tragedy, Dyan Cannon's story refused to end, for from those darkest years would come a turning point. Faith, resilience, and a refusal to surrender would slowly bring her back, not to the naive ingenue of her youth, but to something stronger, stranger, and perhaps more enduring, a woman unafraid to live loudly, even when the world preferred her silence.
Dyan Cannon's life is proof that survival can be as radical as success. Out of depression, broken marriages, and an industry that seemed determined to discard her, she carved a new identity, not just as an actress, but as a truth-teller. In the 2000s and 2010s, she re-emerged with surprising energy. On Ally McBeal, she played a flamboyant, razor-sharp judge, ripping off toupees and skewering men with fearless wit. In Diagnosis Murder and The Rookie, she showed she could still deliver suspense and physicality well into her 70s and 80s. In 2019, she even lampooned herself in The Simpsons, bragging about outlasting 3 husbands and 4 facelifts, turning pain into punchline. But Cannon's greatest legacy is not a single performance. It is the audacity to live without apology. At 80, she starred in the indie film Hope's Legacy, tackling themes of animal cruelty and corruption with the same conviction she once brought to Hollywood melodrama. At 84, she raced through chase scenes in The Rookie. And at 88, she shocked audiences again, joking about friends with benefits, laughing at her own passport scandal, and launching a podcast that mixed faith with backstage confessions. Behind the flamboyance lies a serious contribution. Cannon helped pry open doors that Hollywood had long kept locked. She proved women could produce, direct, and control their stories. She showed that age is not an expiration date. And by speaking openly about trauma, stalking, and mental health, she gave language to wounds many kept hidden. Her story is not tidy. It is jagged, scandalous, defiant, like the woman herself. But that is precisely her legacy, to remind the world that Hollywood's most enduring rebels are not those who conformed, but those who refused.
Dyan Cannon's story is not a Hollywood fairy tale. It's a dossier of secrets, triumphs, and scars, proof that even in an industry built on illusions, truth has a way of breaking through. From the terrified girl in Tacoma to the fearless woman laughing at scandal in her 80s, Cannon never surrendered her voice. She redefined what it means to age, to love, to fight, and to survive under the harshest lights. But here's the question. How much of her legend is fact and how much is fabrication? Was the passport scandal a slip of vanity or a symbol of rebellion? Were the whispers of affairs and sabotage mere rumor or something Hollywood didn't want us to know? What do you believe? If you want more untold stories, subscribe to Beyond the Red Carpet. The secrets don't stop here.